Dakle, nastavljamo sa prezentacijama. Sljedeći je kolega Andrej iz Palo Alto Networksa koji će vam pričati o Next Generation Firewall rješenjima za koja mi verujemo da su definitivno najbolja trenutno na tržištu. Poslije toga će Siniša kratko, odnosno pola sata da priča o tome kako se izboriti sa virusima i novim pretnjama. Ručak koji će biti ovdje, nakon ručka Davor sa hitnom pomoći i poslije toga pitanja i nagrade. Te vas pozivam da ostanete do kraja. Andrej.
Hi, good afternoon. So I think I'm the only one that speaks in English today. Sorry for that. So to start with, my name is Andrej Kalin. I'm system engineer for Palo Alto Networks. And today I'll talk a little bit about our platform, our security platform, and more about how our firewall works and what's the landscape today. So a little bit of information about Palo Alto Networks. We were founded in 2005. Our first product was released in 2007. So we still consider ourselves the new person in this market because we came with a new approach and there aren't any other vendors that are big as us that were created after 2007. So to start the presentation, I want to start with a little story that I heard from a friend of mine from India. So there were 6 brothers that they were all blind. They never saw an elephant in their life. And they asked somebody if they can lead him to the elephant, such that they can feel it, they can touch it, and see how an elephant looks like. So then they all went with a guide. They felt the elephant. And as you can see, each of them had a different impression of the elephant. So after touching it, being blind without seeing the actual elephant, they were like, okay, well, I feel a spear. I feel the skin like a wall. I feel like a rope, the tail over there. So as you can see, each man is partially right because what they felt is actually correct. The tail is like a rope, and everything else is exactly as they describe it. But if you take them all into consideration, this is not actually true because each of them feels only one part, but they don't see the whole picture. So this is the same with attacks nowadays. And traditional security designs cannot cope with how attacks nowadays are because they are only seeing part of the attacks. They are seeing bits and pieces. They never put it together. So then you never see the whole picture. So considering what has changed, well, the volume of attacks have increased. As the persons from Semantic mentioned before, the attacks are really increasing nowadays. Well, they mentioned more, I think it was more than 100% increase of attacks. Yeah, that's the volume. Also, the attack vectors change. So previously, you had one guy that was sitting home, creating his own scripts, creating his own attacks, and he had only one goal in mind. I either make that company not work correctly, and I'm paid for that, or I'm just getting the data out, and again, I'm paid for that. That was the ultimate goal, to be paid for doing harm to somebody else. 0 days attack, of course, they also increased. Sheer volume, of course. And also, nowadays, as I mentioned, previously the attackers were only one person sitting home. I did that when I was like 12 years ago. I created my own attacks, which was very rudimentary, very easy to create. Nowadays, there isn't only one person, they are companies. So you can imagine, we are all, I think we're around 100 people in this room. We're on the other side, we're trying to defend. Now, imagine that if the attackers have something like this, the same conference, and they are like even 10 people, then the way that they can develop those attacks, it's much faster and it's more complex. It's not only one person thinking anymore. So the traditional security design fails to cope with all of this work. Now, if we look a little bit at the evolution, well, Darwin said something, but he also, we can think that he didn't mention the whole quotation. So the strongest species will adapt and survive, but he didn't say that the most responsive one to the changes in his environment would actually be the one that will going to thrive and will be the one that will going to stand at the end. So we try to place ourselves into that quote, and what Palo Alto Networks Next Generation Security Platform stands for, well, it's a design from a ground up. So we're not building on old technology. We created a new technology from the beginning that can actually cope with all of the attacks, counter them, and as they manifest and morph against all of the solutions that we have. So this is some information that I read in a paper from Verizon in 2015, and this is how an attack is actually released and how it actually spreads into the network. So every new infection is happening every 3 seconds nowadays. So if we look after 1 minute, well, we have almost 2,000 endpoints that are infected, or you can say in a network, that's how much it gets infected. Well, you might consider that's a small number, but if we look after 15 minutes, we almost have around 10,000 hosts that are infected. And that's from one single attack that was released. After half an hour, we have around 45,000 hosts that are infected from that attack. So now if you have a solution that cannot cope and prevent this as fast as possible, well, yeah, you have to deal with remediation from a lot of hosts, as you can see here. And this is only in 30 minutes. Imagine what happens in 24 hours if you don't actually have a proactive and a solution that can actually prevent. So the idea is to stop the spread, come with a prevention technique. And that's where Palo Alto Networks come into place. We're trying to revive the notion of prevention, because if you look, Cisco, the CEO said, well, nowadays we cannot prevent anything now. So let's just wait, be infected, then we do the detection and remediation. And we say that's not the way to go. You should be proactive, you should try to come with prevention. Try to stop that attack. You have an image over there, it looks like science fiction. Well, prevention is not science fiction, it's something that is real nowadays. And the idea is to try to reduce the attack surface across all the location, traffic, application, and users. So you need to have a solution that can look at the network perspective, but also look at the end user. And because the end user, the traffic over there can either come through the network, or it can come through a USB stick. So it's not sufficient to have a firewall. You need to be able to be anywhere in the network in order to see the attack coming and be able to prevent it. Now, if we look how an attack is actually happening, and we do a parallel with how medicine is happening nowadays, since we are in an IT clinic session nowadays, well, you have, let's say, the spread of a virus and the multiplication of the population. If you only try to vaccinate some of the people, in the end, you might not have the proper solution. If you try to vaccinate a whole family, then all of those descendants are going to be immune to that attack. So, but the rest will not going to be, because you only vaccinated that person. And if you have mutations, again, you will not going to be able to stop that attack from happening. So the idea in the end is try to vaccinate as much as the population and then be able to stop that infection from happening. The same is happening in the network. So if we look at a common network, so we have the internet, we have the firewall, we have an endpoint which has connection to the database. This is usually the basic scenario that we see in any companies nowadays. So the first thing that an attacker will try to do exploit. Will try to send an exploit, will try to infiltrate into the network after he did the social engineering and found out what kind of security, what kind of system it is in place in that company. Next, he'll try to exploit a vulnerability on that system. He'll then try to deliver a malware inside. Then that malware will gonna either run itself or will wait for the host to actually activate it and run it. Command and control will happen, because then the attacker needs to say to that malware what it actually wants. So in the case of ransomware, we're going to say, okay, do the encryption and send me a verdict back when the encryption is done such that I can ask for the money. It might be the case that lateral movement is happening. So for example, let's take a company that has recruitment. They will gonna open all of the PDFs, all of the resumes, the CVs that are sent by people that are trying to get hired. So then the attacker will try to infect those users, then move from those machines to other machines until it gets to the machine that it actually wants to infect. And then it will gonna exploit that machine. Because that machine might even provide him the possibility to go into the data center and then steal the crown jewels, how we call them. The information that everybody tries to protect and the attackers try to get out. So the idea is you have all of these steps. You can prevent an attack in each of these steps. The most important part is to be able to see what's happening in all of these places in the network. And of course, yeah, that's what the attackers want in the end, is data exfiltration or a verdict. In case of the ransomware, they will not gonna retrieve your data, they're just gonna get an answer back, yes, data is encrypted, now you can ask for the money. Now, if we make a comparison how a UTM, how a legacy firewall works, and how Palo Alto Network works, well, I try to make a comparison between a medical clinic and a firewall. So we all have a family doctor that we go for when we're called to just have a prescription, get some medicine, and things like that. Now, that's the same as the firewall, the basic firewall that looks at IP and port. It just looks, it scans, okay, do I allow this to go through based on IP and port? Yeah, okay, basic, nothing more it's done at this level. But now you have specialists, right? In the medical doctor, the family doctor, we're gonna send you to specialists. Okay, your liver hurts, okay, let's send you to this specialist. Okay, maybe he doesn't know exactly what it is. I'm gonna send you to another specialist. The same happens with the firewall. It has blades. These blades can be either physical or they can be software blades, but they are pieces of software that help the basic firewall in order to protect and to understand what exactly is happening. So you have traffic going in, the same as the patient is going to all of those doctors to be analyzed. And each of those security blades, we're going to look at the traffic and try to analyze. Of course, you already see here problems because this is serial processing. You don't have predictability. You cannot say, because each of them are seeing the patient. In the case of the firewall, they're seeing the traffic individually. Well, in the end, they're not going to talk to each other and they're just going to give their own verdict. So if you remember the story at the beginning, this is exactly what's happening. You have different pieces looking at the traffic, giving alerts, but they're not talking to each other. So they don't know exactly if this is a real attack or if it's just a scan or maybe it's nothing. If we look at the doctor, each doctor, we're going to write its own information into the file of the patient, right? So then you have multiple files, and then somebody has to go through those files and put them together, put them into one single file, such that you actually see what's happening with the patient. And that's manual labor that is happening. The same is happening with the UTM or the legacy firewall. Somebody has to go through the logs of all of those security blades, security features, and see, okay, I have an alert from, let's say, mail. I have an alert from the AV. I have a logging entry. Are all of these correlated, or are they not? Do I have 3 attacks, or do I have 1? So they have to spend time in order to do that. The same happens with the firewall. You have management for all of those pieces, so you need somebody that understands and can program all of those pieces. Each of them will gonna write their own information in one log, and then people have to read those logs and then correlate them together. And if we look at what Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Because when an attacker created their first malware, well, they had one scope, and then they added one other scope. They added 2 more steps. They added 3 more steps. So the idea is not to add one other solution that we're going to try to fix that step or try to identify that step. You want a solution that can actually do all of this together. And that's what our founder, Nir Zuk, created with the next generation firewall. If we look at back at the analogy with the medical clinic, well, You have the medical doctor, you have the family doctor. Why don't you give him a little bit more responsibility instead of just looking at you, okay, you're coughing. Well, okay, take paracetamol or something like that. Try to give him a little bit more role. The same is happening with Palo Alto Network and the next generation firewall. We identify applications from the start. We don't look only at IP and port. Next, you have the specialist, right? And you have your patient that is coming in. Well, why don't you send that patient, let's say, either clone it or use all of those specialists to analyze that user, or in this case, that person at the same time, because then it's way faster and everybody can talk to each other and they can come to the same conclusion. The same happens in the next generation firewall. All of those analyses, they're not done anymore in serial. They are done in parallel. And because everything is done in parallel, they talk to each other and they can actually come to a conclusion that it's actually valid and true. When it comes to the reporting part and to the correlation of the results, well, if all of the medics analyze the same patient, they're going to write in the same file, so you don't need extra work afterwards to understand what exactly is happening. The same with our next generation firewall. You have one central management location, one central logging place, and all of those logs are actually correlated. So you don't have to spend time to analyze all of them. So, so you have the IPS, the URL, wildfire, user ID, anti-malware. Each of them are giving alerts that something bad is happening out there. Well, you don't want to actually go individually into all of them and see what exactly is happening. You want to have a screen which says an attack is happening, and these are all of the alerts that I've seen. This is where traffic is actually going into the network. And that's what Palo Alto Networks created with the next generation firewall. Coming back to our next generation security platform, this is what it consists of mainly. So you have the next generation firewall, which can analyze things in parallel, such that throughput never drops, you don't have delays happening. We have the threat intelligence cloud, which we call Wildfire, and this is for transforming zero-day attacks and unknown attacks into known attacks, and we actually create signature for it. And then we have Traps, which is endpoint protection. So I already discussed about the firewall. Let me present a little bit how the Wildfire works, the threat intelligence cloud. So all of our firewalls, you can consider them as patients out there that get infected or that can see the traffic. All of that traffic can be analyzed, can be easily seen. Okay, I have a signature, and we're using polymorphic signatures. I hope that you are aware of how polymorphic signature works. So for an attack that comes through, you create a signature. But I can change the name of the file, or if the attack has 3 steps, I can change one of the steps. And then the traditional solutions are going to see, okay, this is something new, I haven't seen it, I have to analyze it. I have to create a new signature for it. With the polymorphic signature, well, if you change the name, or if you change 1 step out of 3, that signature will still going to be able to block the attack, because it says, okay, I have 2 steps that I've already seen before. The third one is different, but I know that those 2 steps are malicious. So why don't I stop it right now instead of analyzing, wasting time again to come to the same conclusion? So that's what's actually happening. Suspicious traffic is sent up to Wildfire, which is doing analysis in sandboxing. We're doing sandboxing analysis in virtual environment. We'll also start doing analysis on bare metal, so not only in virtual environment. And as you can see, we're looking for command and controls. We're allowing our sandboxing images to be infected to see if they're trying to contact an attacker. We're monitoring the URLs that those infected hosts are reaching. And we're also checking with third-party software. We're part of Threat Alliance, and that's an alliance between multiple vendors on the market, and they are all sharing information about attacks that they found. They are sharing signatures. And that's why nowadays Wildfire has a rate of identifying correctly an attack of 99.7%. And that's the score that we obtained in the latest NSS lab for sandboxing. Next, after we identify how an attack is happening, we're kind of updating also our threat intelligence cloud information base, because we're creating new signatures. We're updating the URL filtering because we know from where the attack is happening and where the attacker is standing behind what DNS. So that's also updating. And we are creating command and control signatures because we know how the hosts are controlled. We see the traffic and we see the patterns. And that's how we can stop it. The same happens in the case of ransomware, and that's how we can stop it as well. And then everything is pushed to all of the firewalls that have Wildfire subscription. And on this entire process is happening in 5 minutes. If you don't have a Wildfire subscription, this entire process will happen still in 5 minutes, but the last part, step number 4, will gonna be sent to your firewalls within 24 hours, not within 5 minutes. So that's how Wildfire works, how it's transformed. And the file that it can analyze are program executables, so that's DLLs, exe files, everything that Windows considers executables. We also analyze Mac executables, so DMG, Mac O, and all of the others that are for Mac to be installed. We are analyzing PDF, Word document, Acrobat, packages and installation and all of those things. So if we look at Wildfire and how many attacks we determine and how many applications can bring attacks, well, this is kind of overwhelming, at least for me it was at the beginning, because we have 154 different applications that are bringing in malwares and attacks into a company. And as you can see, there are really different domains and different applications over there. So now if you have a solution that can actually see all of those applications, and match the traffic to the application, well, you can consider that a lot of these attacks can be stopped immediately with just a simple firewall. So I've been talking about detection. Well, this is how smart our protection it is with detection and prevention. And I've talked about polymorphic signature. Well, our polymorphic signature, the best that it can do, it can stop 331,000 malware variations with only one signature. I consider that to be really sufficient if we consider all of the attacks that are happening. And we have signatures that can cover a lot more. On average, per week, we analyze more than 20 million samples, and we identify more than 200 unique malware, and that's per week, as I mentioned. And Wildfire Threat Intelligence is sourced from more than 9,000 customers worldwide. This data is from 2015 because we create annually this report, and we create them in August. So far this year, I know that we have more than 11,000 customers that are using Wildfire. So you can imagine that the number of samples that we analyze is also growing. I also mentioned at one point that you want all of the logs, all of the alerts that are created, you want them to be correlated, such that you know what's actually happening without going through all of them. And we have all of our firewalls have a correlation engine inside, and they are mapping all of those alerts together. Also, with the help of Wildfire, we see all of the indication of compromise, and we can also correlate those indication of compromise with the traffic, and then we can say for sure, well, you're infected, or this attack is actually coming and it's going for this kind of information, and we stop it. So if we have all of this in mind, well, a change is needed, because as I mentioned, the UTM cannot handle anymore this structure, and you need a next generation firewall. So if we look at traditional, well, it has limited visibility. You need a firewall that can have visibility into all of it, and you don't want to be in the scenario that I had on my first slide, where everybody is giving their own verdicts about what they can feel, but not on the overall picture. So you want something that can actually see the entire picture, the entire attack. You want a box that can do all of those things in parallel, not in serial, because serial adds delay and really decreases the throughput. All of our competitors on the market, they start with a throughput, let's say, of 10 gigs, but when they turn all of their features on, they reach the limit of a couple of megabytes. In our case, because we do things in parallel, our performances never drop more than half. And when they drop, it's because you're using a lot of VPN, because that requires encryption and decryption. And even in that case, it drops, let's say, to take an example of one of our firewalls, it has an input of 2 gigabytes. With everything turned on, it goes to 1 gigabyte minimum. And if you are using, for example, intensively VPN, it goes to 500 and never drops under those 500. And that's only in the case that you're using site-to-site VPN a lot. So that's my presentation for today about Palo Alto Networks. I can take a couple of questions if you have. Otherwise, I understand there's a session at the end where we can have a one-on-one talk. Okay, thank you.